All right, on this episode of the Learn to Grow Walk and Talk series, I'm going to tell you a story about when I moved to Hawaii when I was 18 years old. So, I grew up in a beach town in Southern California, and when I graduated high school, I didn't really know what my plans were. I didn't really have like any real aspirations or goals. I worked like a few little odd jobs here and there, and I mainly was trying to just work for myself through other people, like clientele, making jewelry, walking dogs, things of that nature. And I remember it was the fall of 2008, and I had just graduated high school, a couple, like in the summertime. And I remember I was lying on the living room floor in my friend's house, who lived near the beach, and I just remember looking up at the ceiling and just, thinking, what am I going to do with my life? Where am I going? What's the next step? And my friend and I had just gotten back from the beach, and I would go to the beach all the time. I loved being in the ocean, loved being in nature. And this was something that was really bothering me. I wanted to figure it out. And one of the jobs that I had taken, I was a gardener. I was hired on by a friend of mine. Let's just say his name is Ron. I'm not going to disclose anybody's names or locations or anything like that, just so that people know to keep things private. So Ron had a little gardening service, and he actually had been going back and forth to Hawaii for over a decade at this point in his life. And he would go seasonally, where he would camp and stay there for the winter, where it was slightly warmer than where we lived, obviously, but he was really into surfing, so that was his fancy, and he loved it there. So as I'm lying on the living room floor of my friend's house, thinking what I'm doing, and this all happened at the same time, where he actually called me, and I didn't pick up my phone because I had it somewhere in the house, and he left a message, and he invited me actually to come with him while he went and looked at a potential position as a caretaker on somebody's land. And he would go for a few weeks, and then he would come back. But he said, I know that you're not sure what you're going to do with your life, but if you want to come to Hawaii with me, I can show you around, and you can stay if you want, or you can come back when I come back. Totally up to you. But he also had a few little connections out there over the years, and he knew the island really well. I'm not going to disclose the island, so just so everybody knows. And I remember just only having a month or less to make the decision that I was going to go or not. And I remember making the decision, okay, I'm going to go. I don't have anything else going on. I didn't have to go. I wasn't planning to go to college or anything. Like I said, I was wondering what I was going to do with myself. And a little backstory, I had friends. I was in a group of friends who some had already gone to Hawaii, or they were living there and visiting, or they were going back and forth. So I had that influence in my life already, somewhat. But I never really thought about it until my friend Ron invited me. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go. I'm just going to do it. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pack a backpack, like a hiker's backpack, and I'm going to buy a one-way ticket. And I'm just going to go. And I really don't know at the time, like, what I was actually thinking or how this would ever turn out. Who really knows? You know, I was 18. I didn't really have much knowledge about traveling like that. I'd only ever really been to the Midwest one time. I never really camped as a kid growing up. Here and there, maybe a handful of times. All I knew was the beach life and my family, and I didn't know anybody there. But it was like an adventure. It was just something that I was like, what the heck? I'm just going to do it. And at that time, I was actually in a relationship. I guess you could call it a situationship. I was in the situationship with somebody that I had been in a relationship with for about 3 years. And I knew that it was time for that to end. We both knew. I think for a long time he had known before me, and this just kind of was another cutting of that cord, just to solidify that. So that was a big step. It was a really big step that I was leaving behind as well. And this person also was going to Hawaii a lot. So, you know, there was a lot of that influence as well. But it was on a different island, so I was definitely not going to see this person, if at all, unless they came to the island I was going, or vice versa. I remember when I first told both my parents, when I told my mother that I was going to Hawaii, I remember being in the house that we grew up in, and her standing there and just me saying, I'm moving to Hawaii. At 18, I'm moving to Hawaii. And I'm leaving in less than a month. And the look on her face was like, okay. You know, she was stunned, obviously. She did not expect to hear this from me. And she was almost like, she was stunned, and she was like, I feel almost like excited for me, looking back and like remembering what her face looked like. And that was that. I was, you know, like, okay, great. I told my mom. And you know, my mom, when I talk to her about these things, sometimes she always brings up the imagery of what she felt, how she felt, I felt for probably the last couple years before, like when I was a minor. And the imagery is, there's this bird, this little baby bird at the edge of a nest, and the bird is flapping and flapping and flapping its wings, and there's like a leash attached to the bird. And finally, this leash, once it was released, once she and my dad let go of the leash, once I turned 18 and they couldn't hold on to the leash anymore, I flew so hard and so fast. And that is how I felt. That is definitely how I felt for the last couple years of being a minor. So this was like a big leap into the starting of my new life as an adult. Moving to an island that I had no idea, I'd never been there before. I didn't know anyone except for my friend Ron, who was basically going to just go and leave after, as far as I knew. And who knows what after that. So I tell my mother, I'm like, okay. And then I have to tell my father. And my father, the way we were raised was very strict. You know, he was very protective. We didn't really go many vacations. Like I said, we were raised religious, and he kind of had ideas for me And I had actually planned to go to an interview to possibly work at this realtor's office that he had set up for me. And obviously I wasn't going to do that, so I needed to tell my father that was not going to happen because I'm moving to Hawaii. I actually, this was the perfect timing because I needed to get a state ID, a California state ID, so I could travel. I didn't have one yet because I was a minor, and this was the perfect opportunity to get one. I had my father drive me to the DMV, and I planned to tell him while we were at the DMV because I needed a ride. And I figured this would be the best chance to break it to him. So as we're at the DMV, I tell my father, look, I'm moving to Hawaii, and that's that. And my father is very non-emotional from what I know of him, and I could tell he was a little upset. And I think he was upset, because he had to tell the lady that I wasn't going to be coming, which it's like doesn't really matter, but he's upset because of that. And I think a part of him really didn't want me to go. So, but that was that. It was like, I'm going. That was probably the hardest part, was telling my father that I was going. And so he dropped me off, and I got my ID. Mind you, I didn't have a license at this point. So I got my ID, and that was pretty much all I needed to go. At this point in time, I had made probably about $1,000 to $2,000. And I bought my ticket for around $300 one way. And the morning of my trip, the guy who I was in a situationship with actually offered to take me to the airport and drop me off. And it was a really unemotional departure, parting of ways. It didn't, it was good that it ended in the way it did, because for a long time things were not the best between us. So it was really nice that, he drove me to the airport, and I think he knew that it was over, before I did. So this was I feel the best way, and it was just okay, it was good. Okay, it's time, and we love each other in some kind of crazy fashion, and we wish each other well, and goodbye. So I get on the plane, and on the plane I was befriended by a woman, and she asked me at one point, "Oh, are you going home from your travels? Are you going back to Hawaii?" And I said, "No, actually, this is the first time I've ever traveled to Hawaii." And she said, "Oh, well, you look like a local, so, you'll blend right in." And I thought that was really nice, because who doesn't want to blend in when you're moving to a new place? Or for those of you who don't know me, I have very dark olive skin when I'm in the sun. And especially out in Hawaii, I had really dark skin. So yeah, I guess you could say that I did blend in really well. So that was really nice in some ways. So the trip was about 5 hours, and I get off the plane, go to the baggage area, and the first feeling and sensations that I get was it is so humid in this place. It was the most humid I'd ever felt in my life. I was already in shorts, and a t-shirt, because I'm already coming from a very warm place in California. So I'm already feeling warm. And, I have my backpack, and I meet my friend Ron outside of the airport. And he had also invited a friend of his, we'll just call him Steven, on this same trip. And Steven's there and Ron's there, and they greet me, and they're in this VW van, an old school VW van that Ron's friend Rick on the island let him borrow for the time that we were there. And so I jump in the car, and you know, in hindsight, I look back and I think, what a funny scene. There's this really young girl jumping in the car with these two older men, and you know, if you're a parent, you'd probably be looking at me being like, what are you doing? You know, hopefully that's, you know, their brother or an uncle or whatever. And that's how I felt about them at the time. There was only platonic feelings, at least for me, and there was never any type of boundaries that were crossed or anything like that. So I got really lucky in the sense that, you know, these two men were very respectful, even though they were quite a bit older than me. And it stayed as much the whole time. So jump in the car and we drive to the place that we're going to camp that night on a certain part of the island, and it was about maybe half an hour from the airport. And we pull up at the beach park that we're going to stay at, and Hawaii has the same national parks as most places do, you know, in California, what I'm familiar with, and Colorado, in the sense that you can rent a site and stay there overnight or for a couple nights at a time. So we were able to pull right up on the beach and stay for the night. And this is like one of the few places on the island that you can actually pull up on the beach. And, you know, and that you can hear the waves crashing and the stars are out, and it's just absolutely beautiful. And oh, I forgot to mention that it was nighttime when I got there, so I didn't get to see all of the landscape yet. And there's a certain smell in the air that is also just so lovely. It's the smell of rain and salt water and almost like rotting guava, even though that sounds weird. It actually ties into all the smells and just like the plants that are all there. And it's just this amazing smell, this welcoming smell that I get memories from when I think about it. And I love it. I just love the way the island smells. It's not like anything I've ever smelled before or anywhere I've ever been. So we camp on the beach, and I sleep in the van, and the two guys sleep on the sand under the stars. And I wake up the next morning and I get to behold the beauty that's around me. And it's just absolutely stunning. I mean, it's a beauty like nothing else. If you've been to Hawaii, you understand. It's like there's something different about it. So, yeah, that is my story about how I made it to Hawaii. And I stayed there for almost 10 years, and there's lots of story behind that, and my time there and my adventures there and in between. And the lesson learned that I wanted to share here is, you know, people might have plans for you in your life. And in this case, there was only one person that did, my father, and he meant well. He was trying to do what he thought was best. But had I stayed there, you know, for somebody else, I wouldn't have experienced everything that I had. And I wouldn't be where I am today, of course. You know, I wouldn't have met my husband because I met him in Hawaii, actually. And I wouldn't have made those deep connections there that I needed at the time. So if you're a young person and you're like trying to figure out where you want to go in life and what you want to do, or just anyone, you know, and you're not really going anywhere, and you're in this place of like, what's next? You know, when you get those nudges, don't take them lightly, because these nudges could change your life. So I hope you gained some insight, or at least were entertained by this story. And let me know if in the comments below you're somebody who have experienced something like this, where you made a decision off a whim and it changed your life forever. All right, everyone. Thanks again for joining me on this episode of Learn and Grow Walk and Talk series. And I hope you'll join me in the next episode really soon. Until then, take care.